Good morning. This video reflects the main ideas of the doctoral thesis that I just concluded at Universitat Abat Oliba in Spain, which was qualified with summa cum laude. This thesis originated 25 years ago. I was working in a company. I resigned and moved into the academia with the intention of focusing my life to investigate how spirituality has a positive impact on the reality of each person, community, promoting happiness and well-being. It was a long journey. It required 3 doctorates, this is the last one, 3 master degrees, and 3 other graduate degrees. The title of the thesis focuses on strategic management. Why? Because strategic management studies how each person, how each community makes decisions, and how those decisions impact on the society. So the central research question is how our lives could change, how the society would change if spirituality had a more important part of our decisions. The title mentions epistemological analysis. Why? Because our decisions are impacted by modern culture, influenced by 3 epistemologies: empiricism, subjective idealism, and realism. Why focus on realism? Because realism is the epistemology that best incorporates spirituality. To understand the impact of spirituality in our lives, it is necessary to investigate realism. So the title concludes how realism promotes social leadership, leading to happiness and well-being. As you see, this closes the loop. So start with spirituality and close it with spirituality. Following the title of the thesis, Chapter 1 starts by analyzing modern strategic management. But the thesis also starts with this topic because the intention is that anyone who reads the thesis could feel identified, that the thesis focuses on their reality. All human beings in our daily activities handle 3 strategies. We all have to manage resources, our capital. With those resources, we create new products and services. We innovate, making our capital grow. And we must compete, always looking to satisfy our communities. If we achieve this, we are satisfied. However, the strategic management experts make a different approach. I rely on McKinsey, with whom I worked many years ago, and then I continued researching. It originated my second doctoral thesis and a book that I wrote, Strategic Value Management. Organizations need to create economic value in order to ensure their survival. And this requires that as a result of our strategies, we have a return that is at least higher than the average return of similar organizations. The economic value added, the EVA, is a financial model that is used to calculate the economic value of a company. According to the EVA, for example, if my profitability is 10% and the profitability of the average profitability of similar organizations is 10%, then this is 0, and consequently the economic value creation is 0. I do not create economic value, and if that is repeated in future years, I am doomed to disappear. It is not enough to do things right. We have to be better than others, because otherwise we destroy economic value. Since 50% of organizations have lower than average profitability, they destroy economic value and would naturally disappear, even though they do things well. It's a very hard reality, social Darwinism, a constant struggle for survival. It is very important to analyze what we are doing. This rectangle that you see here shows that this way of making decisions is an exercise of critical thinking. Modern critical thinking requires to have a mental map, like the one you see, which links the environment. Here I did not put it due to lack of space, with the strategies and with the results. In addition to the map, critical thinking requires a framework of comparison, and in this case, a metric, which the EVA provides, and which also compares strategies and results. All this leads to two very important conclusions. First, how to make decisions. Modern strategic management is based on critical thinking, with a metric of economic value creation, generating social Darwinism. Second conclusion is how we create knowledge in order to make decisions. Critical thinking is an intellectual exercise with two epistemological foundations, empiricism and subjective idealism. This struggle to survive has unquestionable positive social effects. It is a powerful engine of progress and social welfare. However, it has social cost, which impact human resources, families, people, natural resources, allows financial speculation, and allows social inequality and marginalization. The social cost generates negative social reactions, radicalization, and some people abandoning the institutions. This is the first problem presented by the thesis. The second problem presented by the thesis arises when one wants to make strategic decisions with social sensibility. Modern socioeconomic sciences, we are going to focus on three throughout the thesis: ethics, political economy, and corporate social responsibility, CSR, present a mosaic of approaches that overlap, contradict each other without any conceptual framework to select the most appropriate approach, taking into account its social impact. Chapter 2 presents this conceptual framework, linking the socioeconomic sciences of the previous screen and links them with the three epistemologies, or ways of creating knowledge in which the thesis is based: empiricism, subjective idealism, and realism. This will allow us to analyze how the way of creating knowledge impacts on the socioeconomic approaches we saw on the previous screen. Which of the three epistemologies produces better social results? Chapter 3 performs three statistical analyses: a linear correlation, a polynomial quadratic regression, and data mining, associating 118 cultural values related to the three epistemologies in 60 countries extracted from the World Values Survey with 6 social outcomes: wealth, human development, economic freedom, corruption, knowledge, and happiness. The three statistical analyses converge that the empirical and subjective idealist cultural values have positive and negative correlations with the social results. However, it is very striking that the negatives by far outweigh the positives. So the negative correlations are substantially more in number than the positive correlations. Realism, on the other side, it has a clear prevalence of positive correlations over negative correlations. This leads to two very interesting conclusions. To create knowledge, remember we talked about that in the first chapter, realism can be the epistemology with the best social impact. To make decisions, critical thinking based on empiricism and subjective idealism may not be the best methodology. As you can see, we begin to respond to the two problems raised in Chapter 1. To understand the results of the statistical analysis of Chapter 3, Chapter 4 analyzes the strengths and weaknesses of empiricism. Empiricism as an epistemology allows creating solid and reliable knowledge that produce extraordinary scientific and technological progress. However, it generates relativism, subjectivism, skepticism, individualism, psychologism, associationism. Empiricist ethics, utilitarianism, generates consequentialism, which leads humanity to be serious and responsible. However, it allows social Darwinism and weakens the social fabric. The empiricist political economy, the political right, defends free markets, promotes wealth, efficiency, and management of resources. However, it allows inequality, lack of values, negative social results. The empiricist CSR defends the shareholder view, which promotes the creation of economic value for the whole society. However, it allows abuses of market power, human resources, and natural resources, financial speculation, and social inequality. This is very important because it shows the tremendous advances that empiricism has contributed to humanity. The conclusion of this chapter is that the strengths and weaknesses of empiricism and its impact on socio-economic sciences can explain the social cost of modern strategic management of Chapter 1 and the statistical results of Chapter 3. Chapter 5 analyzes the strengths and weaknesses of subjective idealism. Subjective idealism as an epistemology generates logical knowledge which limits the skepticism and relativism of empiricism. However, it has no basis to defend innate ideas. Its denial of the reality promotes disobedience and collectivism. Idealist ethics, the ethics of rights and justice, promote ideals such as freedom, equality, non-discrimination, pluralism. However, its denial of feelings, of consciousness, of the relationship with others to make decisions is incapable of solving many ethical dilemmas. The idealist political economy, the left, promotes democratic institutions, rule of law, prosperity for all, security, international organizations, economic integration, cooperation, freedom, and peace. However, it generates collectivism, loss of freedom, corruption, oligarchies, inefficiency, impoverishment, low motivation. The idealistic CSR is normative, promotes control, transparency, ethically clear limits, community-oriented behaviors. However, corporate controls can harm the company and promote opportunism. Subjective idealism has generated ideals that are now world heritage. In conclusion, the strengths and weaknesses of subjective idealism and its impact on socio-economic sciences can explain the social reactions to modern strategic management of Chapter 1 and the statistical results of Chapter 3. Remember that the statistical analysis of Chapter 3 shows how realism produces the best social results. The next chapter explains why those results, based on the ability of realism to promote social leadership. This chapter is very, very important. I would like to explain it slowly and in detail. First, what is social leadership? It is the ability of a person or organization to bring society to its maximum happiness and well-being. With a future vision, I see here, that communicates to the community, with a mission that is an attitude of seeking the best for all, with a capacity to develop relationships, create communities, with the ability to transcend, to see goodness, beauty, truth, and love for all, and an ability to discern, to make decisions that seek the best for all. Why is realism capable of fostering social leadership? Realism has three orientations. First, the realism of Aristotle and St. Thomas has an empiricist orientation. It relies on the information of the senses, and on that basis, the intelligence generates universal knowledge. The realism of Plato and St. Augustine, Bonaventure and Guardini, has an idealist orientation, which incorporates the knowledge that arises from meditation, contemplation, illumination. In short, incorporates spirituality. This is very important because this refers to all of us, because we all practice different degrees of spirituality in our lives. Spirituality helps to connect with our real self. It is the engine of emotional health. It helps to relate to others, to create and heal the community, and to relate to God for those who have religiosity. This leads to perceive their transcendentals: beauty, goodness, truth, love. And all this is key to living in peace, happy, having a full life. Finally, the Fabre's realism incorporates intuitions of the phenomenology of the 20th century, how reality manifests itself through multiple phenomena, and how each person is able to perceive some of those phenomena better than others. Imagine that you are in an auditorium with 100 people observing a reality, an object, a person, an idea. Each person perceives that reality differently. We are all wired in a different way, or we have lived different life experiences. We come from different families, different psychologies. Some are more sensitive, others are more rational, others more intuitive. Men perceive the reality differently than women. People with different ages, different professions. Some people are more conservative, others more liberal. Different socioeconomic sectors, different religions. All of us have different perceptions. An empiricist epistemology does not help those 100 people in the auditorium to agree, because they all have different perceptions. So each one ends with a different isolated truth. So you have 100 different truths. Subjective idealist epistemology leads each person to have their own logic, which may be different from that of others. So they don't agree. Realism, on the other hand, accepts that there is only one reality, that these 100 people perceive in different ways, and seeks ways to create knowledge in the midst of diversity, to arrive at a unique, multiform truth, rich in perspectives. It enriches me to know the perceptions of others. It leads me to strive to understand their perceptions. And the spirituality we just discussed has a key role because it helps me to understand who I am, to understand my limited ability to perceive reality. It leads me to a humble, open attitude, invites me to listen to others, to value them, to understand their perceptions, and thus be able to articulate our knowledge altogether. And this not only creates collective knowledge, but also creates relationships, community, mutual appreciation. It ends conflicts, resentments, isolation, the most important cause of emotional problems. Now you can see why realism fosters social leadership, how it impacts each dimension of social leadership, as you see here. Why is this chapter key to answering the problems in chapter 1? And why it explains the statistical analysis of chapter 3? A realistic epistemology relies on diverse sources of knowledge and spirituality, creating universal knowledge, integrating the person and the community, engines of social leadership, providing key competencies for modern strategic management. What is the meaning of competencies? Competencies are the most important resource that organizations need in order to succeed. So, what are those competencies? The best possible knowledge, the best possible relationships, community, in order to make decisions. In the previous chapter, we discussed Fabre's vision, linking realism with phenomenology. Chapter 7 investigates how phenomenology enriches realism, fostering social leadership, based on its ability to develop wisdom, consciousness, to connect a person internally and with others as Husserl presents. A realist phenomenology integrates psychology, spirituality, and morality, based on the phenomenological intentionality, which connects a person internally with others and with the world, promoting harmony, virtues, happiness, as Bouyer presents. A realist phenomenology builds values that promote greatness, as Scheller presents, discovers the value of the person and the community, leads to creating relationships, community through the heart, as von Hildebrand presents, the manifestation of Buber's spiritual lives, Stein's empathy, and the ethics based on relations, as Levinas presents. Wojtyla personalism highlights the value of the person, participation in the community, the end of the alienation and isolation of modern individualism, and the horrors of collectivism. The search for meaning to our lives of Heidegger, Gadamer's symbols and metaphors help to understand reality and facilitate dialogue. Why is this chapter key to answering the problems of chapter 1? Because phenomenology promotes greatness, humanism, values, spirituality, spirituality integrated to psychology and morality, meaning of life, emotional health, happiness, relationships, community. They are all engines of social leadership. They are all key competencies of strategic management. Chapter 8 investigates how a realist metaphysics promotes social leadership by helping people discover that there are transcendental realities, beauty, goodness, truth, love, as we saw in chapter 6. And discover the Creator, the Supreme Being, and the participation of creatures with the Creator, as Plato, Aristotle, St. Thomas, and Fabro present. This leads to a personal desire to participate in the creation process, to be agents of social transformation, which generates a vision, mission, values to transcend, fight to be better, build a better world. Why is this chapter key to answering the problems in chapter 1? A realist metaphysics leads to value the reality, desiring to participate in the creation and transformation process, engines of social leadership, providing key competencies to strategic management, capacity for transcendence and participation with the Creator, engines of creativity, growth, and improvement. Here we end with the 3 chapters of realism, and the 3 chapters that follow focus on how realism, spirituality, and religiosity enrich each other. If you see the words in bold, they are words that come or that belong to realism, to spirituality, and to religiosity. These 3 dimensions enrich each other: conscious, meditation, harmony, internal connection, connection with others and with the universe, love and compassion, the value of the person and the community, spirituality, love, compassion, the cleansing of the heart, transformation. You see, all these words belong to the 3, to realism, to spirituality, and to religiosity. Why is this chapter key to answering the problems in chapter 1? Because realism, spirituality, and religiosity enrich each other, fostering social leadership, providing key competencies to strategic management. Finally, we arrive to the chapter on spirituality, the most crucial of this thesis. Realism leads people and communities to spirituality, and vice versa. Spirituality leads people and communities to realism. Spirituality inspires and transforms people, maximizing realism, empowering social leadership. In this first column, note that the titles are those of the last 4 chapters: Realist Epistemology, Realist Phenomenology, Realist Metaphysics, and Religiosity. Notice that in bold you can see the words that connects with the previous chapters: wisdom, contemplation, spiritual senses, symbols, consciousness in the life, spiritual community, emotionality, transcendentals lead to spirituality, transformation, participation, and encounter. Spirituality inspires and transforms people and communities, maximizing realism. These ideas that you have here are really the heart of the thesis. So I would like to explain them in detail. Spirituality transforms. The concept of spirituality means a path, a process, transformation. Spirituality inspires life, motivates, energizes, creates. Spirituality inspires wisdom, enlightens, instructs. Spirituality heals the soul, the emotions, it fills the heart. Spirituality inspires meaning in our lives. Spirituality inspires values, ideas, greatness. Spirituality inspires love, builds and transforms communities. Spirituality helps to discover and value the transcendentals and discover participation. Spirituality contacts us and unites with the superior being. It illuminates our discernment, and spirituality moves us into action. Why is this chapter key to answering the problems of chapter 1? Because realism leads to spirituality. Spirituality inspires and transforms the person and communities, promoting social leadership, building unique competencies for strategic management. The discussion about spirituality concludes with a reflection on suffering that confronts the very foundation of chapter 1. The creation of economic value is the result of the best prices. The best prices derive from the supply and demand. The supply and demand derive from the utility curves, which derive from utilitarianism, which defends the maximization of pleasure and the minimization of pain, of suffering. If we find a solution to the problem of suffering, that entire building collapses. The first column shows how living a life with greater realism can generate suffering, because it can lead to knowing painful realities. Values can lead to make difficult decisions that generate suffering. Relationships and empathy can lead to connecting with the pain of others. Living with greatness and transcendence can lead to accepting sacrifices. Religiosity can lead to a transformation that entails sacrifices, and discernment to admit desolation. That brings us to the second column. Notice how each author in that column, who has reflected on suffering, shows how each dimension of realism is enriched by suffering. Maximizing realism, making it more radical, more transformational. Suffering can generate emotional intelligence, ability to understand others. Suffering can generate detachment, freedom, compassion. It can generate emotional maturity. It can lead to looking for a sense of pain, for the very meaning of suffering. Suffering can connect with others. Suffering can be an engine of greatness, of transformation. Suffering can enrich our discernment, promoting social action. The third column shows how social leadership can generate suffering, sacrifices, efforts for the sake of an ideal. And so we come to the last column. The people who suffer, the most vulnerable people, the person who struggles daily with life's difficulties, can process their suffering based on all these intuitions. Transparency mentions the word may. You see, each one of these dimensions talk about may, because it is a personal decision to confront suffering in a constructive way. This transparency crumbles the building of chapter 1. Empiricism avoids suffering. Subjective idealism denies suffering. Realism confronts it and seeks to solve it, relying on spirituality, maximizing personal and community resources in a path of transformation that leads to social leadership. So what is the conclusion of this chapter? Suffering may strengthen spirituality, an engine of social leadership. Spirituality helps to solve suffering, confronting the maximization of economic value of Chapter 1. This chapter again confronts the very foundation of Chapter 1. In the first chapter, we saw how, to make decisions, modern strategic management relies on critical thinking, which is an intellectual exercise. Linking the environment with the strategies and the results. However, in all chapters of realism that we discuss, we began to question critical thinking because it is based on empiricism and subjective idealism with important limitations. Discernment, instead, is based on realism. It introduces the dimensions that we saw in the previous chapters: consciousness, values, meaning of life, relationships, greatness, transcendence, participation, religiosity, spirituality. So you see, it's much more than critical thinking. Why is this chapter key to answering the problems of Chapter 1? Because discernment is based on realism, involves all the dimensions of previous chapters that we just discussed, promotes social leadership, transforming critical thinking and strategic management. And so we come to the last 3 chapters of the thesis, where the social leadership of each individual and community revolutionizes socioeconomic realities. Social leadership revolutionizes ethics. Ethics is no longer the minimum acceptable behavior. A social leader, a transformed person and community with cognitive, axiological, relational, transcendental, religious, discernment dimensions, enacts behaviors that seek the best for society. Social leadership revolutionizes political economy. Economic growth requires human capital, knowledge, and social capital, relationships. A community with social leadership maximizes both, with richer and stronger capital, incorporating values, the meaning of life, greatness, transcendence, participation in God's plan, maximizing economic growth, entrepreneurship, maximum innovation, and maximizing social justice, maximum social promotion. Social leadership also revolutionizes CSR. Intellectual capital is the value of a company, involves knowledge and relationships. The social leadership of each agent leads all stakeholders, not only the companies, to seek the maximum capital for society, as investors, clients, citizens, and government agents. Maximizing social responsibility is a responsibility of all. So, conclusion is, each person and community becomes a social leadership, revolutionizing ethics, political economy, and CSR. What are the conclusions? The first is that, as you can see, the thesis met its objective. Remember, the objective was to demonstrate that spirituality has a positive impact on the reality of each person, community, nation, promoting happiness and well-being. And also confirmed the validity of all the hypotheses. I will not go through each one of them. This thesis makes important contributions to the knowledge of each person, each community, each nation. Remember that the 2 topics that we talk about is strategic management, that is knowledge creation and decision making. Remember that this is the pillar of the thesis. Regarding knowledge creation of each person, community, and nation, the strategic management of each person, community, nation must be enriched with a realist epistemology because it fosters social leadership, transforming each person and community into social leaders, incorporating key competencies: the best possible knowledge and relationships, greatness, humanism, values, spirituality, integrated with psychology and morality, meaning of life, emotional health, capacity for transcendence, creativity, entrepreneurship, growth, and improvement. Social leadership revolutionizes modern socioeconomic science, as we have just seen in the last 3 chapters: ethics, political economy, and strategic management, providing key capital, not just social and human capital, for the success of the society. Modern thinking must introduce interdisciplinary thinking, integrating socioeconomic sciences with spirituality and philosophy, helping to integrate the person and the community. Interdisciplinary thinking should criticize its epistemological foundations, relying on conceptual models such as statistics, interdisciplinary, and phenomenological analysis. Regarding decision making, the decision making model used by modern strategic management must change, based not only on critical thinking is fine, but it's not enough, but also on discernment, involving all dimensions of the person and community that realism provides. Finally, regarding spirituality, the role of spirituality in each one of us. Spirituality inspires and transforms each person and community and nation in its dimensions: vital, cognitive, emotional, existential, axiological, relational, transcendental, religious, discernment, action, contributing to our happiness and well-being. The last intuition provided by this thesis is a vision for the future of society, solving problems that current cultural paradigms fail to solve. How would we, our lives, society, change if spirituality were a most important part of our decisions? So spirituality empowers realism, inspiring and transforming people and communities, promoting social leadership in each person and community, improving the socioeconomic realities, fostering happiness and well-being, especially in vulnerable sectors. This last column reflects on who is the main beneficiary of realism. If we do the calculations with all these percentages in the right column, we are probably get to the conclusion that all of us are vulnerable, some more than others, and therefore, in one way or another, we could all benefit with this dissertation. Thank you.